All right, we'll get started in just a moment. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Taylor. Good to be co-hosting with you. Um, so as we're getting started, please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from, your city or your state, maybe your organization's name, just to get us started. So my name is Nadia Oseguera-Ramón, and I'm going to be co-hosting today with Dr. Ray Taylor. We have a panel discussion. So an effort to get us moving along into a very important conversation that we will be having today. We'll be running through the intros a little bit quickly just to get to the important topic. So before we get started with everything else, I'm actually going to hand it over to Sheila with Maddie's Fund, who has an announcement to make.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila. I'm with Maddie's Fund, and I just want to announce that we have a really exciting Camp Maddie coming up. It's on pet inclusive housing. It will be on Wednesday, November 13th from 9 to 11 Pacific, and it is free to attend. So just register. The information is in the chat. Thank you, Allison. And we have wonderful speakers from Michelson Found Animals, My Dog is My Home, Heart LA, and My Pitbull's Family. So I'll put some of the topics that are going to be discussed in the chat, but I really hope we see you there.
Thank you, Sheila. Such an important topic. So I hope a lot of folks will join y'all. So today we are not going to have national updates the way we normally do. Instead, we're going to ask you to please drop any updates that you have into the chat. Preferably use this time to drop them in there. So as we're having the panel discussion, there's not a lot of distraction in the chat. So please, any events that you have going on, any webinars that you want to spread the word about, any work that you're doing, drop them in the chat at this time. And with that, we are also going to make some space for question of the day, but we're not going to take too much time. So I know I'm asking for two different things here, national updates and then question of the day. So in light of today's topic, we want to hear from you all who has been a key mentor or influence in your journey in this field. It could be somebody when you first got started or somebody that you met along the way. And maybe Dr. Taylor, is there somebody that you would like to give a shout out to?
It's one of those things that, like, I did have a mentor and it's come full circle. So I had a mentor called Dr. John Howell, who as a teenager showed me what it was like to be like an all animal practitioner. And then it turns out that now on the board of veterinary medicine, we serve together. So it's been pretty awesome full circle experience.
That's wonderful. And like, I imagine there's been a lot of growth that you're now getting to be together, doing the work together. That's great. I see somebody posted a couple people, Kitten Lady. Certainly, I know a lot of us learned how to bottle feed watching her videos. And then Dawn Jordan and Jillian Lane from the Lane Foundation. That's awesome. I have to say my mentor, he's actually a friend and probably will be blushing right now, but Miguel Relas, who's also part of our Community Conversation Steering Committee. He was one of the first people that I really got to talk about all of the inequities happening in animal welfare. And I thought it was just all in my head, but he's been a really great sounding board, and I think he's really contributed to a lot of my growth. And I know a lot of folks who have met him probably feel the same way. So yeah, so keep the inspiration coming. Any last minute updates that you want to drop in the chat, please drop them now. But I'm actually super excited to hear from today's panelists. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ray Taylor to take it over.
Well, thank you so much. Very excited to share our team that we have with us today. And we have a constellation of some excellent humans. Dr. Azalea Boyd, she's a veterinarian in the Atlanta, Georgia area. She has a company, Boyd Veterinary Services, and she's got a new podcast up. So you'll see that link in the meeting chat. Lucy Mata, who is in Colorado. She's a veterinary assistant. She's president of a newer organization called Natives in Vet Med. Dr. Mendaz Chumki Aziz, she is with an exceptional organization in California, the UC Davis Koret Shelter Medicine Program. And then we have a technician, Jessica Lopez, who gets to do some also unbelievably amazing work at the Paw Mission in the West Coast. So without further ado, I could probably talk for an hour for each of these humans and their resumes, but we're going to do some quick introductions for the team. We're going to do a little bit of a rapid fire round to let you know who is with us and kind of see where we can relate. So our guests, I'm going to rapid fire. I'll call you off since we're on a different screen. And our answers are going to be short. So under 20 seconds, ideally. So let's go with number one, your role in the profession, Dr. Boyd.
I am a veterinarian right now. I do consulting, and mostly when I do practice, it's emergency medicine.
Right, Dr. Shumke. I'll have you unmute.
Thank you. I serve as a outreach veterinarian, as a shelter medicine consultant, and I spend a lot of time right now writing different guidelines and publications, and I enjoy mentoring students, so I look for students all the time.
Wonderful. Jessica.
I am a RVT as well as executive director of the Paw Mission. So I oversee our programs, which include high volume spay and neuter, wellness programs, our rescue, and then our humane education.
Hey, Licia.
Hi, I'm Licia Mata. I am a veterinary assistant, and in my day work, I do emergency critical care at a specialty hospital in Northern Colorado. And then in my free time, I am working with my amazing team for Natives and Vet Med to hopefully increase Indigenous representation in the veterinary field.
Awesome. All right, next round. Why this profession, Dr. Boyd?
Oh, so we're just going to keep going. Okay.
Oh yeah, we got
Why this profession? I'm just going to give a short answer. In my second semester of college, my roommate came in. She told me a crazy story about pregnancy testing a cow. She reached her whole arm into the rectum of a cow to feel the baby. I thought that was super fascinating. I loved connecting with farm animals. Switched my major, and here I am. I'm a veterinarian now.
Wonderful. Dr. Shumke. We'll go same order.
Sure. I figured out, I guess, early on in school that I wanted to help a lot of people and a lot of pets at the same time instead of one-on-one. So I went into shelter medicine.
Jessica.
I knew I always wanted to work with animals, and I initially wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I got to see how much more I could do in my position. I was an RVT. I did critical care, emergency, general practice, and I've just loved where my career has led me.
Yes, yes.
The short answer, I'm really passionate about human-animal kinship. It's really embedded into my culture, Ojibwe Lakota culture. It's the pinnacle of it. And then as I got older, I really loved science, and the veterinarian just seemed like a very natural fit for those two passions. So
This is a quickie. Do you have, or did you have a role model or a mentor in the profession? And were they a person of color? Dr. Boyd.
I did not have a mentor. So yeah, I can't answer the second part of that question. This was very much something that I kind of worked on as my own without mentorship.
I had three mentors. I was very lucky. One of them was a BIPOC professor, and the other two were not. And everyone, I was very lucky to not just get mentorship, but I feel true sponsorship from them as well.
Perfect.
When I first went into the field, I did not. And at one of my first general practices, I did have an RVT who is a veterinarian from Mexico. He kind of inspired me, and he always told, I used to be a Barreto, and it was siempre sigue adelante Barreto, and it means always move forward. And that was like, I have it on all of my stuff. So yeah, he was my mentor.
Wonderful.
I mean, you already know this. Dr. Taylor is one of my amazing mentors I met my freshman year of college, but until then, I didn't have any mentors. But I consider her and Dr. Lauren Bernstein two of my amazing mentors who helped me through all of it. But I did not meet them until college, so.
And I asked this question because in our profession, no matter what role you're playing in our profession, we have to own the fact that there's a predominant race, and our profession is so completely different than what the general population's diversity racially is. And that's something that we're here to talk about. And so thank you all for coming here today. The profession is predominantly cisgendered female, white, which is a transition from cisgendered male, white. And so that's why we know that there is a discrepancy, because the people that we work with who have animals, we are not representing the same racial diversity in the profession that we are in those who have pet owners. And so that is, you know, the blanket indication that we have a problem, that disparity, of course, is much deeper than that, but that is important. And just in this conversation, you see a lack of representation, so it makes it even more of a barrier for persons of color to see this as a profession that they may want to enter. We may also be fighting barriers of trust with the medical professions. And honestly, if we have a decreased diversity racially or any type of diversity, then we're also decreasing our ability to have cultural awareness, to have ideas that are different outside of that monolithic. And that's why it's important to all of us, right? Everyone on this call should have awareness of this, because we all play a role. And so hope that with this discussion today that we listen to our guests' lived experiences and recognize those as truth, and understand how can we each play a role in that? How do we maybe inadvertently perpetuate a lack of diversity and that disparity? And how can we consciously kind of reprogram what we do to be able to do that? So I hope that is what of our guests be able to share with us, and what our listeners are going to be able to take away. So with that, kind of want to dive into one of our questions here. I would like you, if you feel comfortable, to share a barrier that you faced just to enter the veterinary profession. And we talked about how, why you owned it and your role, but how was it to get in? Did you find it was easy? Did you have a barrier? And if so, what was it? So we'll start with Jessica.
I feel like one of the biggest barriers was obviously, I initially wanted to be a veterinarian, and getting into vet school, like my college, it was suggested to me by my counselor that I might not make a good fit in the veterinary field. And it was, a cisgendered white male who was my counselor. And I want to say that I remember being pretty devastated, but I'm pretty stubborn. And I was like, well, let me go find a job. And I would say that would probably be the next one. Is a lot of places don't want to hire somebody because they don't have experience, but you're never going to get experience if nobody gives you a chance.
What about Dr. Boyd?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I did experience some barriers right at first. And for me, it was the lack of really knowing about the profession in general. So when we were doing the fireside questions, my first realization of veterinary medicine came when I was a second year at university, at college. And so prior to that, I was always good at science, always good at math. And so being a product of Caribbean immigrant parents, education was very much pushed and forced, and the way to a better future was through education. And so kind of the idea was that I was going to be a doctor, right? But I had no real idea about veterinary medicine. So I think from a cultural background, I wasn't really exposed to the profession. And then once I finally did get into one, I was always the kid that was bringing in animals. Every rat, squirrel, lightning bug, if you guys remember catching lightning bugs when we were young, I was bringing everything inside. But once I got into exposure to veterinary medicine, then it was like, well, where am I going to go to veterinary school? And I started taking tours to veterinary colleges and realizing that all of the classes that were 100 individuals per year or more, literally none of those faces resembled anything to what I looked like. So for me, it was also very discouraging seeing years and years and years and years of, maybe one every 5 years, someone of BIPOC backgrounds, but that was also very discouraging. I would consider that a barrier.
Thank you. Lucia.
Yeah, I am actually in this process right now. I am on my second round of applying to vet school. I think the biggest barrier I have seen is that I don't check the boxes that were intentionally made to keep me out of the system. So I've worked with 2 universities that have a vet school where I'm invited to speak on panels to help train veterinary students on communication and cultural humility and cultural competency, but I am not good enough to get admitted to their schools necessarily because my grades don't check the boxes they want. So the things I've done to try to check those boxes is I finished my master's at CSU in toxicology. And I feel like I've had to do extra steps to fit into those boxes for the application process, which is discouraging because I was never meant to fit into those boxes. The system was specifically designed against people of color from entering into medical fields and aspects. So that has been my biggest barrier.
Dr. Aziz.
I'll echo a bit of what Dr. Boyd said. My family was, they immigrated as well. And yes, I agree. They wanted me to be successful and just put my head down and study. But I realized too, a lot of it was they absorbed tenets of white supremacy. And so they wanted me to become successful so I could fit in and I could they could share, they could talk about me with their friends or with their coworkers. And I noticed this later on in life that I did go to vet school. I became a specialist, but even then it was, why didn't you become a specialist that we could, talk about easily, like a cardiologist or an oncologist? No one knows what a shelter medicine specialist is, and I don't blame my family in any way. I think a lot of it is these tenets that they take on from living in America and just trying to get by in America.
These are excellent points, and I really appreciate you all for sharing, because I know for me, it also is really emotional to think about those challenges, the complete lack of awareness. Like, I didn't know this was even an opportunity. I didn't know it was a field that I could be involved in. I didn't know anything about college and grades, and I didn't have the luxury to be able to focus on school, knowing how important it was because I had to work and support my family. It was just a very different cultural shift, and it was such a barrier to get into veterinary school. And which is why one of the things I do now is advocate so hard for that, because all of us are talking about some really similar things, like the lack of knowledge, like to know the entire picture. And that when we're seeking that knowledge, we're getting the knowledge from people who aren't like us, who aren't necessarily welcoming of us and can be dismissive. And so that's even an additional layer of barrier. And then there's this entire systemic piece, the fact that the education system is built in a different way from a colonial representation standpoint. And then there's this, cultural assimilation that's happening, and it happens in all of the places, from an area, especially in several generations of wanting to fit in and wanting to be safe. And so we know that those things come from positive intentions sometimes, but the outcomes have a negative impact. And that's what a lot of this is about, right? This is just the reality. This is where it's at. We hope that most of this is happening not intentionally, but until we talk about it, until we create awareness and validate that this is real, then we can't correct it. And so that's why we're here talking about it. So I know that you shared with me some really diverse differences of your barriers. And just curious, are you guys facing barriers to stay in the profession? Alicia, I know you probably started to mention that already.
Yeah, I feel like the compassion fatigue is definitely something I've felt in these recent years. I'm very passionate about the work I do with natives in vet med and with rural initiatives for indigenous communities to have access to veterinary care, and partner in a way that is long lasting and culturally appropriate for them from veterinary professionals. But it's hard to constantly deal with the microaggressions in vet med. And to feel that you're being taken seriously as a veterinary professional rather than simply just a person of color to hit a checkbox. Um, and also just the discouraging that I can do a lot of good things, but it's not necessarily what they want for the application process is very discouraging at some points. But luckily I have really supportive mentors. I have a very good support system, but I know that's not there for everyone. And that's kind of what I'm hoping Natives and Vet Med can tackle, is just creating some type of community or support during those microaggressions when you're trying to balance cultural responsibilities, family responsibilities, and connection in terms with school. For example, I remember getting told by my academic advisor that it was impossible for me to double major in Ojibwe language and animal science and hit all my pre-vet requirements. And I went against him anyways, and I ended up graduating in 4 years with both of those degrees. So it is possible. He just was not aware of how that was possible. So just paving your own way, but it's very hard when everyone's discouraging you through the whole process.
Jessica, how about any barriers to stay in this profession?
I would say, compassion fatigue is really big in general. I am really fortunate that my organization, it's kind of doing everything I want it to do and it's growing. So like personally and like professionally, I don't have any issues with that. It's more what I see in not always being able to help, whether that's families or pets. And that's, I would say, just our regular compassion fatigue is a huge one.
Dr. Aziz, you talked about just familially what it's like to have a challenge, but do you want to expand on that and any other barriers you're experiencing to stay in this profession?
I think that it's a bit of a segue, but I think there is, of course, there's an expectation to, like, the goalpost keeps moving, success keeps moving, and especially in, I think, some of these cultures that are viewed as the model minority, and it's hard. It's like I can never do enough to placate everybody, and it's hard too. I think in general, being BIPOC in vet med, because it feels like you have two jobs all the time. It feels like you do your work, but then you're also doing the work, and you're doing the work for, it's like trying to be authentic at work, juggling your identities, sticking up for other BIPOC friends, trying to mentor students, helping to recruit other BIPOC colleagues. Like, there's so many things that are asked of us, and it is a whole nother job. It feels like it's a lot of work on top of our regular work.
Completely agree, and I want to dig into that. But before we do, Dr. Boyd, do you want to share any barriers for staying in this profession?
Yeah, I think from the looks of it, I'm much older than all of the other panelists on this call, right? So I would agree 100% with some of the barriers to stay in the profession. So I've been in the profession now for 17 years. And so I have seen things shift, which is actually at this point in my career, very hopeful, right? There's a lot more conversations such as this one that's happening right now, where we get to actually talk about these things that we're going through, and people are actually, like you guys on the call, here to listen and try to figure out solutions. So that has been a shift and also very encouraging. And there's a lot of organizations at the moment that I think are truly genuinely doing the work. like Leticia said, Natives in Vet Med. There's other organizations that are also creating inclusive spaces for BIPOC people in the field. So for that, I love veterinary medicine. I wouldn't choose another profession. It has gotten easier to want to stay in the profession. And because now I'm of this part of my career, being here to support other BIPOC individuals exactly who need that mentorship and who need to actually see me. So it's almost like I can't leave, right? If I leave, who are the other kids going to look at, right? So you know, but when I started, I was definitely the doctor that heard from the receptionist. The receptionist would come back and say, "Hey, the client said that they went on the website and they don't want to see the Black doctor," right? Or when I walked into an exam room and the client is facing me and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but my dog is racist. We're going to have to reschedule." Those things actually happen to me. And like what the other panelists have said, those aggressions, micro or macro, definitely do kind of add up and can be more of a struggle for some people to stay in the profession. I call it the triple burden because I have the burden of performing the job as a veterinarian already, right? The burden of educating others, so my colleagues, about diversity issues. And then I also feel the burden of feeling like I'm responsible for every BIPOC client that comes into the organization. So we have compassion fatigue and everything else that veterinarians on a whole and those in the industry on a whole deal with on top of all these other things. And of course, eventually that does lead to burnout. And for some, limit the longevity of wanting to stay in the profession. But yeah, I think on a positive note, to end on a positive note, I do see a shift, and that's really encouraging.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, what a crazy constellation. The veterinary profession is already known for having excessive compassion fatigue, having a really high rate of suicide, unfortunately. And then you compound it. I know that I experience it, but everyone here is talking about it. It's that like multiple job thing, right? You have all of this stack, that compounded duress and stress, because you do feel like you have that responsibility. You have, you're seen as the resource. Oh, you have all wisdom Indigenous, you have all wisdom Latinx. Like, and that is an unfair expectation that our partners place on us. And it sounds like everyone here is facing that struggle as well, and will probably continue to do that. And that's unfortunate, but that's a reality. So I want our listeners to realize, oh my gosh, that's happening. And am I doing that? Because that's one of those things that you can help relieve pressure, that we are not the expert of all things us, just like you, any listener, is not the expert of all things that any label you have represents. So that compounded responsibilities can get really, really difficult, especially when we think about all of that mental demand and the physical demand. And so overall, when we look at how racial inequities specifically address our presence in the profession, now we're looking at, are we decreasing our own longevity inadvertently? And that just further decreases representation. And what kind of health outcomes are we seeing in individuals? So do you feel that any of you are experiencing additional like physical ailment health because of the pressure that you're experiencing in the profession? Does that sound like something you're experiencing at all, Dr. Boyd?
I don't know. This is actually funny. I'm trying not to be funny because I think with emergency medicine, it's just stressful. And so I don't know if I'm always in the break room snacking because of that on top of everything else. Yeah, I think that there's definitely veterinary medicine, one, is already physically demanding. So you're lifting animals, you're standing up for hours during surgery, doing long surgeries. So I think that there's a physical demand. And then you get to the mental health aspect of it. So I do think that sometimes that's overlooked. There's emotional exhaustion of decision making and being able to relate to every client that comes into the exam room. Make sure that especially me as a Black woman, when I walk in, I have to literally make sure that that client trusts me, because to be quite honest, if I was a white male, I could say garbage and it would be believed, and I've actually seen that happen. So it's like, I can't believe he just said that. That's so wrong, or that's not the right, advice. But for me, there's this extra level of really getting the people to know that I actually am smart and I do know what I'm talking about, and really building that trust. So yeah, it can take a toll on you. And when you get to the point of burnout, you kind of get to that point where you don't necessarily, I hate to say it, care as much. And because I've been in the industry for a while, I do remember a time that I actually had nothing to give. I didn't care if Fluffy was sneezing, coughing, choking. It just, it was just so much. And I did need to actually take a break. So yeah, I hope that answered your question, but there's definitely that emotional component. As far as my physical health, I think that changes. I do value self-care, so I'm very mindful. My family also kind of keeps me in check if I'm doing too much. But yeah, I think that it all combined.
I don't want to put everyone on the spot, but if any of our other panelists want to share about physical impacts or health impacts that we think are compounded by the demands of our profession.
I would say, so I've been in the field for 21 years now, and I have burned out 3 times. And it is like, I wouldn't say it's like a rite of passage, but I feel like at some point everybody can experience that just due to the demands of our field. Like, we are going to encounter, the first time was when I did emergency critical care. I was really burnt out of just seeing so many animals having to be euthanized because owners couldn't afford care. They couldn't cover the cost of what it would be for an emergency overnight diagnostics. And then, shelter medicine and even high volume spay and neuter, like that's a whole different sect of, issues that people encounter. Like, you get really jaded with people. You feel like they're not doing enough. And, veterinary medicine is prone to that already, where people are very much against, or it's us versus them. And so, as we've put in, checks and balances and for myself, so that way I don't feel that way. But that's something that has happened. Like, it's been 3 times. And I think that's insane for 21 years of being in this field.
And just to add, I'm going on month 4 of being in emergency critical care specialty hospital, and I can definitely echo the fatigue that comes with it. I feel like I maybe have more compassion for clients compared to the fatigue I get is from my own coworkers who I love dearly. I mean, you become a very quick family in ER, I feel like, with the stress and the cases you're taking in as a team. But the clients not being able to afford something, and then you have to go in the back and listen to your coworkers say how that person's a horrible person and that they should have done XYZ, when I'm thinking in the back of my head, if I was in that situation, I couldn't have afforded that. I can't afford that as a veterinary assistant. Even if I knew everything that I needed to do to save my pet, that wouldn't necessarily be something possible or plausible for me. And then I go through a rabbit hole of, well, they're going to judge me if I ever have to go through the situation, even though I work here and I try my hardest at my job and things. But yet I'm still going to be judged because I simply just can't afford, I don't have a credit card to throw these bills on or things. So I think that's where my mental well-being has definitely been pushed to the limits, is having those conversations with my coworkers. And I do feel the burnout of, it doesn't feel like my job to explain basic human compassion to people who have 20 years seniority on me at times. But at the same time, if I'm not going to say it, who is? Because they've been in this field for 20 plus years, and yet they still make comments like that that are so just, to me, just not kind or what should be in this field. So it's definitely a balance of, when do I decide to speak up, as I'm going on year 5 in this field, but I'm definitely still consider myself very new in the field. I'm always willing to learn, but also, when do I speak up to stand up for my clients and my patients? Because to me, they're one operating family. They're not I don't get to just take care of the patient because I don't want to talk to the client. It's a whole thing. So that's my biggest mental fatigue lately in ER.
Yeah.
I'll share briefly around mental health. There was a time when I was working plus volunteering a lot of my veterinary time, professional time, and I sacrificed, I think, my own personal health and well-being and connection with my family because I was working a lot and I was writing emails at midnight. And I think sometimes I didn't have a balance, and I was looking to distract myself sometimes. And so I would just go into work and keep doing it. And it wasn't until someone wrote to me and said, it makes me feel very bad about myself that when you email me at midnight and I can't reply right away. And I realized it was setting a very poor model for other people in terms of not having boundaries and balances in work life. Yeah.
I think this is something that unfortunately ubiquitous, amongst the veterinary profession, but it's absolutely magnified when you're trying to figure out that balance. You're trying to say, how do I advocate? Do I have the energy to advocate? How many, aggressions did I endure today? Or do I advocate for someone else? Or you're carrying all of that strain and stress, period, in part of the veterinary profession, but magnified and compounded. And so we know that in the medical profession, that's also compounded with physical implications of long-term disease processes. So it would be reasonable to expect that's happening in our profession. We don't even have the data, right? We don't have the idea of what's going on. And just for reference, for those listening, that over 90% of the veterinarians, and just slightly less for veterinary support staff, are white. Less than 5% are Asian, less than 3% are Black, less than 0.5% are Hispanic or Latin, and then less than 0.1% are Indigenous. They don't even get a number. So just for reference, that's what we're talking about here. That's how incredibly not diverse the profession is. So let's flip gears a little bit. We're really, I think, creating some awareness of what it's like to have this disparity completely, encompassing us on a day-to-day basis. What about allyship? What are we seeing that, people that we've worked with, whether it's mentors or, partners on a shift, what are we seeing that has been helpful, that has actually felt supportive? If you guys want to share any of those things that someone else has given to you, maybe that they're not a person of color, that they are a white ally, how have they supported you in a way that was meaningful to you? Dr. Aziz.
I can share. I feel I have been very fortunate, and I have had instances where an ally has voiced concern for us, but for the team, but for me as well. When there was concern that if I voiced it, there might be some degree of retaliation, and so it has been helpful, and it has been in many cases helpful to have an ally that you can talk to authentically and candidly. Yes.
I'll piggyback off of that. So I have also experienced allyship, mostly through my colleagues. So my colleagues, when they use their platform to elevate my voice, that has been wonderful. So if we're in a meeting and they see my hand up, or someone's not, calling on me, hey, Dr. Boyd has something she'd like to say, right? I think that's a very small kind of classification of allyship, but really using your platform, like your hand went up after mine, but they still are tying it back to me, offering me opportunities to speaking opportunities, inviting me into leadership conversations. And again, just simply making space for me to share my perspective. And I think that those are things that can easily be done to demonstrate allyship. I think the other part of kind of allyship that I've seen that's not what I consider to be true allyship is that you're my friend and you're saying you're my ally, but you're not doing anything active. So I think it's important for the audience to know that allyship really needs to be proactive, right? It goes beyond just the passive support, and trying to make some actionable steps to support the person. So if you know that there's a student that's coming in, you know, and especially if you are white male or female, it's more likely that you're going to go to the white male or female students to mentor them if you see them, just because there's a level of familiarity with that person. However, really pay attention to that BIPOC student that is sitting in the corner that's likely feeling isolated, right? Mentor that student, show them a little bit more attention there. That to me is proactive. That's true allyship. Same thing, if someone has their hands up or if someone's, maybe afraid to speak because they don't want to get labeled, assure that their voice gets heard. I think that those are areas where a lot of my colleagues throughout the way really demonstrated allyship.
I would like to say that well, maybe it's been about a year now. Time flies when you're having a lot of fun, but I have a great collective for BIPOC and animal well-being. I'm part of their steering committee. And, I feel like it's such a great space to be in because we're all in different roles within the field. And yet I never feel like they won't understand what I'm talking about. It may not be like the nuances of what it is to be my job, but they're just there and they're like, hey, tell me what's going on. Let's figure out a better way. So I feel like the collective has helped me a whole bunch. Even if it's just to know that there's other people who are experiencing the same thing, it really has helped. So yeah, our BIPOC collective, I feel, has been a great source of, just allyship in general.
Yeah, just to piggyback, I love all of those things that were brought up. I think my biggest thing is I've been working with organizations rather than asking, well, how do we fix it? How do we be a part of the solution? Is asking, what do you need? What do you need to help support your own communities? And I really love the aspect of getting to partner with organizations that instead of coming in with, I call it a white savior mentality. Other people call it other aspects. Is how do we partner with you to elevate the voices that are already trying to address the issues within your own community rather than coming in as an outsider who tries to fix issues that they have not lived their whole lives. So that has been my biggest appreciation for getting into the nonprofit and all these organizations I've been able to collaborate with through Natives and Vet Med.
Right. I'm hearing these really beautiful things like calling out, making sure voices are heard, seeking out those points because they're probably disproportionately, not getting that anywhere else. I love the idea of letting those individuals have the solutions themselves, trust their wisdom. And there is a report out, and I'll have Sheila drop it in the chat for us, that has some guidelines about how to engage with different communities. And so this is a new report, so feel free to look at that. And other suggestions. Panelists, do you guys have ideas of people want to look, they want to learn, and they are scared sometimes, or they don't have a clue where to look or who to ask or how to ask respectfully. So what advice would you give, like places to look for training, books to read? What are your go-tos for people who want to learn and do better?
I will put a wonderful plug in for the DEI ambassadorship that ALA sponsors. That small group training and the that community, I think is just an honor to be a part of and to get into, and it exponentially just keeps going in terms of supporting you, and they are growing their program themselves, so it has been really wonderful, and I recommend it to anybody.
I can jump on. So lots and lots and lots of resources out there. I think I've mentioned that, which is very positive. Diversify Vet Med Coalition. They're creating spaces for veterinary students who are BIPOC to feel supported. Blend Vet, there's courses, there's mentorship platforms, and we can drop those in the chat as well, like Possibilities. The American Veterinary Medical Association also has training on cultural competence, and I think those are great resources. But I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity just to talk about a podcast that I just launched called Critters and Cultures. And basically, we are also, in a way, teaching cultural competence. Race is so closely tied in with culture. So the podcast could be a way for you guys to also just kind of listen in, hear from different perspectives, and just kind of explore the many ways that culture shapes our relationship with animals and the experiences that we go through. So I will drop that link in the chat, and I'm hoping that you guys listen in and give some feedback on how we can hear from more people, more voices.
Jessica, do you have any resources, go-tos?
I would say, if you've heard any of my other discussions, I really feel strongly about talking to people and being really open and transparent with what you're trying to learn. I don't think for many people, it would be too much of an issue if you go like, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm wanting to know more information. Or do you have the capacity to help me understand something that I'm missing, or know of somebody? Because I think that a lot of people can be intimidated by, mentioning the wrong things, or feeling like maybe somebody could, or something could be a little bit too sensitive. But, really understanding and being open to listening to people and their lived experiences, I think is really important. I don't think the mass majority of people, maybe this is the first time they're hearing about how much of discrepancies and issues that we see in veterinary medicine are tied to race. So I think it's really important that people try to initiate conversation and, always ask if they have the bandwidth, because it's also not any BIPOC person's responsibility to teach you anything. But there are definitely people who want to help and want to help, the dominant majority figure out what's going on. Like there are allies in the BIPOC people that want to help the majority.
I love that. A lot of resources that you can do, solo, you can ask. And I think that you hit on an incredibly important point, Jessica, is that when you're asking, like, be vulnerable, like, I don't want to do this wrong. I don't know how to do it right, and own that, and not necessarily expect that that person has a responsibility to be the one that help you educate, but you can always ask respectfully for a resource. And I know we talked about a bunch of different things and links. And so what we'll do for those listening is we're going to actually be able to put all of those in the list for you on the conversation on Maddie's, so that you have a place to go for that. So don't worry if you haven't been able to catch all of those. We will curate that for you. And before we go here, like I said, we could all talk about this forever. Thank you so much for our guests to join us here. I just want to give you guys a last chance. Any last comments for allies or people interested in getting in the field who are BIPOC? Words of wisdom, Dr. Boyd.
I would say stay true to your passion. So I have two messages. One, for those getting into the field, stay true to your passion, follow your dreams. It is everything that it's cracked up to be. Of course, there's tons of areas to make improvement, but again, the veterinary profession, although it's not about just playing with cats and dogs, we do play with cats and dogs a lot. So it makes it worth it. And then for those that are listening, I would say just stay authentic, be real. Don't just do things to check off boxes. Really, if you're going to say you're increasing diversity or you're interested in supporting, just make sure you do it in the way that you know how to do it, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions. And yeah, that would be my parting words. Thank you guys for having me here.
Jessica.
I would say that even though I've burned out 3 times, I'm still here, and I can't see myself leaving this profession. I love it in all its nuances and its oddness, and I think that the more compassionate people that we have in this field, the better served our animals and the public that we serve, the families that we serve. So if you have a passion and you want to help people and animals, because that mantra of like, oh, I'm going to get into veterinary medicine because I hate people, that's not an actual one. You're going to deal with people every single day. So as long as you care about people and you care about animals, I think it's an amazing profession to get into, and especially shelter medicine. So, yes.
Good plug in there. Alicia.
Yeah, I think my parting words would be, when you're entering spaces such as this forum, is be aware of the space you're taking up. And I don't mean that in a physical sense, but I feel like inherently white identifying people are used to being in the front of the room because that's how society has placed it. And people of color tend to be isolated in the back, whether that's because of cultural teachings. For me personally, I was taught to always listen first and then speak. So that tends to be why I will be in the back. It's by my choice because that's how my communication and my listening tactics have been taught. But I think it makes it so much harder when people are taking up so much space in forums that are for BIPOC people because they think they're doing the right thing by asking a lot of questions and trying to learn the most they can. But in reality, they're taking away the space from the people that these forums are intentionally created for. So that would be my parting words, is be aware of the space you're taking up. It can be very difficult sometimes when you've done it your whole life, but just be aware of, am I being the pinnacle of attention when I am supposed to be an ally in this space? And then just a little plug of Natives in Vet Med. We have a website, nativesinvetmed.org. We have a forum there, or not a forum. You can send in questions and things, and goes through our whole board. So we try to rotate out so no one gets some compassion fatigue through those questions and things, but we have a whole board who looks through them to give advice and recommendations when working with Indigenous communities.
Thank you. And I apologize, we're a couple minutes over, but I just want to give Dr. Z's a last moment to give her parting words.
I would suggest that if you want to go into veterinary medicine, understand what you're going into. Vet med likes comfort and familiarity. And so know the system you're getting into and know how to work within the system so you can make change. And so my advice is find someone who will advocate for you, sponsor you, and mentor you, and get you connected with other people, because vet med is still a small circle. And unfortunately, they like keeping it that way.
Well, thank you all for sharing. I can't thank you enough for joining us today and being vulnerable on the call. And thank you for all of our listeners. And feel free to follow up on the community chat board, and we will see you soon.